Thank you.
You know, I was wondering last night...
Wait, let me pull my trail with me.
There's no hurry. I was wondering, with Sunday night, yet another opening for Neil Simon, it'll be a big celebrity-studded audience. Do you have a sense of anticipation and intrigue about this opening night, or have you done so many now that you don't really get up for them?
Well, it's not that I don't get up. I just don't get up as much for it, because the first two plays that I did, Come Blow Your Horn was the first play, and then I did a musical called Little Me. And it was such a frightening experience, I said I would never do it again. I mean, I thought my heart pounding would annoy everybody in the audience.
That loud,
keep them quiet. After that, Barefoot in the Park was the next play after that, and after about 7 minutes into the play, I knew it was going extremely well, and I started to relax. And ever since then, I don't think I get quite as nervous during opening nights. I generally would pace in the back of the theater. Now I may sit someplace and just sit and watch the play.
Were you there last night at the theater? I was there.
Yes, I'm there every night during these previews because we are still making changes. Minute, but some changes.
You know what I wondered, and I don't know if you can answer this, but I'm going to ask the question. We'll see. What does the laughter do to you when you're there watching from wherever you're watching, a box or in the back, and the audience, as they were last night, really laughing hard? What does it do to you? How does the energy affect you?
Only in the beginning, when I first hear it, in the first couple of previews that we've done the play anywhere, in this case in Los Angeles, it's gratifying. It means that the audience is enjoying the play, and I get a great sense of elation. After that, you sort of become a barometer and say, well, it's not as big as last night, or it's even bigger than the night before. And again, it becomes not meaningless, but not as important to you.
Just take a minute, if you will, and explain the autobiographical component of Chapter 2. In a way, it's like Barefoot in the Park 24 years later, Barefoot in the Park reflecting one stage of your own life and this another. Yes,
well, that was a very happy time for me, Barefoot in the Park. It was about the first week of my marriage. Chapter 2 was about the most tragic aspect of my life and letting go of the past. It was after the death of my first wife, to whom I was married for 20 years, and about 4 months after that, I met Marcia Mason, and we fell in love, and with the blessings of my children, we got married, and I thought everything was going to be smooth sailing after that, and suddenly one realizes that you don't let go of the past that easily. There's a lot that you take with you and must be dealt with. And I was not quite ready or prepared for anything like that, nor was Marcia. And so the play deals with the courtship of Marcia and myself during the first act, and the second act deals with the repercussions of having gone into something fairly soon, not ready to deal with it, and how we both did deal with it and get over that.
One of the things I'm curious about is the risk involved in getting married so soon after meeting somebody. Marcia was on the show the week before last, right? And we were talking about the fact that you and she married after 22 days.
After we had met, yes. Right.
22 days after you had met. Right.
And we had postponed the marriage for a week during that period.
How do you know?
Well, it's an incredible instinct. It's only happened twice in my life, and I even used the very line in the play. I knew Joan, I believe, 6 weeks, and we got married, and the marriage lasted 20 years. So I had no feeling that the shortness of time was something that would stop us from really having a fulfilling marriage. I remember I met David Niven in California, and I was telling him about how lunatic I was to get married after 22 days, and he just stared at me, and he said, well, that's nothing, dear boy. I got married after a week. And he's been married somewhat for like 20 years. It is fascinating to try to figure out what there is when you meet somebody like that you just simply know. You cannot really describe on any level what it is that happens. It's much more emotional than intellectual, right? Well, it is, but I think I can carry it over to all aspects of my life. It's not just meeting Marcia. All of my work, everything, I just sort of plunge in. I have made some mistakes, but not as many as I could have. You must have an incredible, excuse me for interrupting, you must have an incredible trust of your instincts. I do, absolutely do. In terms of the work and in terms of my lifestyle, I know I've gone against the better judgment of other people and saying you're rushing into this or that, whether it was my relationship with Marcia. I had the same sort of flack when I first met Joan after such a short period. My brother said, you only know her 6 weeks. I mean, go with her for a while, learn. I said, no, I know everything I want to know about her. Well, I didn't, of course, but we spent the next 20 years learning about each other.
You also have an incredible trust and incredible faith in the institution of marriage and in the coupling of two people, correct?
If it's good. Well, I think everything starts with two people. I mean, I think all of society's problems can be solved by two people getting together, and the best example is Sadat and Begin doing that.
That's right. He gets off the plane and something happens.
Exactly. Cairo, I mean, Egypt didn't come and Israel didn't come. Those two men came, and then the rest come together.
A good point. We will continue with Neil Simon in just 2 minutes or something like that. We'll be right back. Neil Simon has a play opening this Sunday. It's called Chapter 2. It's at the Imperial Theater, a huge house. Are you worried about the size of the house where your play is going to be playing? Because it is a big theater.
It is, but coming from the Armington Theater in Los Angeles, which was like, you know, Dallas Stadium, I mean, it's really big. So it seems like we're in an intimate theater now. It's much larger than some of the theaters we have played in the past, but we've already done 3 or 4 previews, and they've done just fine, so I'm not concerned anymore.
I'm interested in getting back to the mechanism within Neil Simon that draws upon the autobiographical experiences for both the pleasure and the pain and the human revelations that you talk about on the stage. In Chapter 2, we find two people, the two main protagonists, each of whom has just lost a partner, one through death and the other through divorce. And the man, portrayed by Judd Hirsch, is essentially on one level you, correct?
For the most part, yes.
For the most part,
not
you.
Specifically, because Marsha and I did not meet that way,
No.
but for the most part.
Yeah. Now, some of the things that happened to him actually happened to you.
Right.
For example, I'm curious as to whether or not when the widows start calling him and the people are pursuing him because he is now a widower, did that happen to you?
Yes, it did happen, and it was, I didn't quite know how to handle that because it had never happened to me before. I mean, not having gone out with women until before I met Joan, which was 20 years before, and I was in my young 20s. And suddenly having women calling me up to go out on dates was something that I felt was very unusual.
How did you respond to them? I mean, were you able to be honest and say, look, I'm not interested, or did you end up doing a lot of stuff you wished you hadn't done?
Well, I didn't go out with any of them. What I did do was try to handle it the best way I could, but I did feel badly about it because I felt a certain... some of them were quite good about it, and they were very open. One woman just called and said, look, you're in the same boat as I am. What are we fooling around? Why don't we just go out and have dinner? But I knew the woman, and I just really didn't feel like doing that.
You said we can be in the same boat, but we don't have to paddle together.
Which is what we said.
One of the lines in the...
Yes. So it was difficult. I felt badly for some of them, the ones who could not handle it very well.
Yeah.
But still, I felt that there was a great deal of courage on their part for doing it. And I thought, in the end, those who were able to do it would turn out a lot better than those who withdrew completely.
Also, at one point in the second act, the central character, who is paralleling you, speaks of something that we have talked about in this show, agoraphobia, although he doesn't use that term, being afraid to go out of the house. You actually had this syndrome?
Yes, well, this came during the period of my wife's illness, actually. And it was, in some sense, I felt a nervous breakdown. I just could not control any of my emotions or feelings anymore. And one day I started to walk to the corner, and I felt that I was stranded out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or something, and I had to go back into the house. And even the house felt confining, that I had to get into another spot someplace, even into bed. It was the most frightening experience I've
had.
had.
How long did that last in your life?
Well, it lasted for a few weeks, and finally I just checked into a hospital and just rested for about a week, and started going to see a doctor, and eventually worked all these things out.
How could you get back from this point to being funny? Or, you know what I mean? At some point...
It took a long time, yes.
I would think that...
Well, first, it took a long time just to get the desire to really want to live, to really want to go on with your life.
Well, you had your children, though.
Yes, well, that was probably the mainstay of my life. I mean, I kept saying all along that that is what I had, and it was my responsibility to be with them. And so I just pushed myself through. I think I also have a very strong sense of survival, and I'm a fighter, I think. It's the reason I write so many plays. I just want to keep starting a cycle of life over again. The beginning of each new play is the beginning of a new cycle of life for me.
How long did it take you to write Chapter 2? And
didn't take enormously long. It took about 3.5 months to write it, but I kept doing it over and over, so I would say there's about 6 months all in all.
Another thing that I know a little bit about you is at one point during this period when your first wife was dying, and it was so difficult for you, somebody said that you had to let go, which is, and I've been doing a lot of reading of the Swami Satchidananda, who is saying not to be attached to things, you know. If something comes, that's good. If it doesn't come, that's good too.
Well,
and you then said you don't really have many possessions, which amazes me that you don't have, like, scripts that you've written in the past.
Yeah, I used to read about that too, and I would read that philosophy about letting go, but I didn't quite really know what it meant. There was nothing applicable in my life that I could let go of until Joan's illness, and a friend who had believed in this philosophy said, the more you try to hold on, the more it's going to be painful for you. If you try to deal with these things with an open hand and say, let go of that and let go of everything in your life, you will be able to move on to the next step. And I have been that way for the most part all of my life. For example, I wrote for years and years on the Bilko Show and Show of Shows and many other shows. I don't have one of those scripts. I don't think.
Why is that, Neil? Did you throw them away?
It was never very important to me. I don't have the first draft of any play that I've ever written.
Who does?
I don't know. Somebody may have it. Maybe the typist has it. I only have the finished versions because those were the only things that were really important to me. But I am not so heavy into memorabilia and keeping all of these things. One would have stacks and stacks of them. I wonder when I see people who have their own autobiographies or biographies written of them, all of the letters that they have saved. I don't have any letters. I just think, you know, we're passing through, and I'm enjoying my time in life now. And
I'm also curious about this. You know, we're sitting here having a, you know, relatively serious conversation. Yeah, it's a very zen conversation about Neil Simon's life. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, could you have gone on a television show, had a serious talk like this, and not worried about getting laughs? Is there a part of you that you have finally dealt with that says, I don't need to prove I'm funny every time I appear someplace?
It would go back even a little further than that. I think after about the third or fourth play, after around Barefoot and the Odd Couple, I started letting go of that. I mean, I'm not even intent on being funny socially, because I used to be quite intent on that. It meant some sort of acceptance and that they liked you. Well, I feel that my work speaks for myself, and in terms of being humorous, I do it for myself. If I'm in a situation with my wife or children or friends and I think of funny things, fine, we're all enjoying it. But I don't do it for the purpose of selling myself anymore.
One thing I'd like to talk about, and we're going to do it with our next guest. Stephen West is coming up next? Okay, we'll go with Stephen West right after this. All right, now, Neil Simon and I just admitted we did have a fairly zen conversation. I don't know where it came from in our past or whatever, but it was interesting. And joining us right now is a man who may be the antithesis in terms of his values of what we were just talking about. This is Stephen West. Stephen West is a self-made millionaire. He's written a book called How to Live Like a Millionaire. He conducts seminars all around the country, helping people to be successful, helping them to get a lot of the possessions.
Because it seems to me that if one's addicted to money, then it gets into difficulty. As an example, I met two gentlemen before the show here who were involved in prison art, and they're trying to help the world.
They'll be with us later on.
Okay. Now, I'm going to help them in some way because they have a very worthwhile project, and we have a bunch of department stores in Detroit who can help sell their artwork.
Good.
Money can be a tool to make it a better world. It doesn't have to be something you gather. I have no rings. I have no chains hanging from my neck today. Neil and I are dressed on a comparable basis. I guess neither one of us are looking too fancy. So I think for most of us, a level of money is important. It's the addiction to keep reaching for more and more money that's more difficult.
There is an addiction. Once you want to have it, then once you want to have it, you're going to become depressed if you don't get it. But in this book, How to Live Like a Millionaire, you talk about a lot of tricks and things that people can do, even though they're not millionaires, and I've got a couple of them down here. Neil, I think you'll find this interesting. How to get a luxury home without a down payment.
Right.
Now, how do you do that?
Well, you know...
I'm sure Neil had to even put a down payment on his house.
Well, not necessarily. I've read some of Neil's stuff and seen his stuff. He knows life as it really is, and life is not reality. Life is, to a great extent, an illusion.
Life, all is illusion.
Reality.
Now we're back in the zen now.
I knew we'd get back to agreeing with each other. But actually, most people don't realize, Bill, that you can rent homes and do what's called a lease purchase. Let's say that you find a magnificent home out in Long Island, and it's been sitting up for sale for a year, and the owner is accruing taxes and expenses and electricity. Many people will go out and lease purchase a house. They'll take this fantastic mansion, say, look, I can't quite afford now to pay for the house, but I'd like to try it. So if your mortgage and your taxes are $800 a month, I'll pay you that at least, and I'll take an option on buying the home for $120,000.
So this is one of the tricks you indicate how to live like a millionaire. You can have the big house.
Exactly, and one can walk in with the first month's rental payment. Now, if you or I were stuck with a home in Long Island and we're building up the mortgage payments, we might just be attracted to that concept.
Okay, now a couple other things. For example, how to get VIP treatment from airlines and restaurants. Now let's take a person who's watching right now who's flying to Akron, Ohio over the weekend, or Cleveland, Ohio over the weekend. How do they get a VIP treatment on the airlines?
Actually, most of us don't know this, but the airlines actually put it in their computer if you're a VIP or not.
Yeah, but how do you let them know?
You just have your secretary call and say, Mr. Boggs is coming on, and, you know, he's a TV personality, he's well known, he's well respected. Please be sure he's taken care of. He's a little bit fussy, and they fall over themselves.
Okay, but see, the shoemaker across the street is watching right now.
He has
right?
his wife call up and say,
how to live like a millionaire. He wants to go. He wants to go to Akron.
Absolutely.
He doesn't have a TV show.
His wife calls up and says that Joe Shoemaker is a major shoemaker here in town, very well respected.
Lying, then.
No. Exaggerating.
Exaggeration. Huh?
He might be a major shoemaker in town.
Right.
But I think it's a question of just going out of the ordinary, whether it's the maitre d' at the Four Seasons or whether it's the American Airlines to Akron. All you have to do is just ask for something. Quite often you get it. Now, if you ask the airline for some special treatment, often you get it.
Neil, I'd like you to talk just for a moment, and because we're really talking about success when we say how to live like a millionaire. You have probably in your life seen people drastically change the way they perceive you because of their perceptions of your success.
Was that a question?
Yes. No, that was
I
a
didn't
you
see
have
the
a
question
problem.
mark. Yes.
Yeah.
Their attitudes, I think, changed towards me very early on when suddenly you are catapulted into some fame and success, and they think that you have been to a place that they have not been to. It's like you have walked on the moon, and you come back, and they treat you differently.
What ways? Like how, specifically, how would people...
I remember, for example, members of the family, cousins and relations like that, would stop calling me on the phone. And they would call my mother instead and say, how is Neil, and could we get tickets for the show? And she said, well, why don't you call him? I said, well, he's busy. I don't want to bother him. Before, they used to bother me all the time. It didn't really affect me greatly, but I did begin to see the separation. People do separate you, and they imagine that you live a lifestyle commensurate with what they read in the movie columns, I think.
Again, like specifically, can you think of something that people thought that they assumed you were doing because you were successful that you hadn't even considered doing?
Well,
yourself?
I mean, I keep getting interviews, and people say, well, why don't you buy a yacht? And for one thing, I get seasick. There's no point in buying a yacht. I don't know. Imagine why they think that my life would change so extraordinarily.
Also, as a writer, a man who probably grew up from the time you're being a little child, really observing and drawing from people, right? And all of a sudden to become successful and then to be so observed, does that affect you at all?
Well, it's affected me because I once thought that I was invisible when I was 8 or 9 years old. Invisible because
Seriously?
I was one of those nice, quiet little boys who sat on a chair when he went to visit his grandmother, and they gave him a cookie and left him alone all day long. And I was growing up that way, and I said, no one ever notices me. I am a complete non-entity. And in a way, being a writer, you hold on to that sort of anonymity. You are behind the typewriter, no one gets to see you. And suddenly your work is put on the stage and they like it, and another one is liked, and suddenly you become very famous. And so the person who becomes famous is the one who put down all of those words. But I am still me, that kid who grew up in the Bronx thinking I am this non-entity. And getting those two people together was quite a job. They're meeting, I think, a week from Thursday.
So I hope they have a good time together. I hope one isn't late for the meeting. Stephen, get back. What motivates you to be a millionaire? I mean, you are supposedly a millionaire several times over. Why are you doing it?
Well, I guess why have I done it, probably?
Why have you done it?
Because I really don't care to go beyond this point particularly. I have other objectives now. I think I came from Brooklyn. I was the poor kid from Brooklyn, and I'm meeting my other half now also, you see. And as you grow up in Brooklyn and getting a Spalding to play stickball with is a very big thing.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you lose it and hit over the roof, you can't play ball for a couple of days till you shovel some snow or something. You develop a hunger. You develop a motivational pattern. And so you began to search in what makes Sammy run. And then you run a little bit and you achieve some success, and all of us who succeed fail also. There's no man who ever makes it all without a failure. And you get there and you get there, and I went through a chapter 2 also. I'm remarried to a very beautiful and wonderful person who I met instantly. I saw her across at a show and I said, that girl was for me. And at the stationery show, I met Sherry. And so you go
At
through
the
a
stationery store?
the stationery show,
Oh.
stationery show in New York in the Coliseum 2 years ago, and I saw this
A dancing envelope or something?
She was very beautiful, Neil. Very beautiful. Matter of fact, she was in a very fine package, as a matter of
Yes.
fact. Totally drew attention. And so I've gone through that stage as well. I think the motivation is almost automatic and subconscious. Again, not to get into Zen, but you're making up for early deprivation. That's true for most
Were
of
you
us.
really poor when you were a kid?
Not really, but I saw a lot of things I couldn't have. You know, if I wanted a guitar, that was out of the question. I was middle class in Brooklyn and reaching. And when I went to the Wharton School, now you went to Penn also.
Yeah, I did.
And that was
Same time you were there, as a matter
That
of
was a traumatic experience. On my floor, I had the gentleman whose father was the president of the country of Colombia, another gentleman whose father owned Burke's Meat with 2,000 trucks in Philadelphia. Another fellow was a poverty case who was brought in on a scholarship. And the divergence of all these personalities, and one person lived in a mansion in Bryn Mawr, another person lived in a ghetto in Chicago. And you develop a comparison, you develop a hunger. And you come out of the Wharton School all fired up.
Let's hear it for diversity.
Okay.
So you're all fired up to make a lot of money.
I was, and then I realized there's a declining utility to money. Now, it's great to live well, and it's great to have a beautiful home, but if you keep being addicted to it, that's a great negative.
You know, I'm sitting here wondering about if I should ask you this. I'm just going to do it.
That's okay.
You talk an awful lot about being really successful and impressing people. I am really curious as to why you've bleached your hair.
Well, actually, I've tinted my
And
hair.
I don't mean that as
that's
but you are supposed to be a symbol of a guy who's being successful.
Right.
And I took one look at you and I said, geez, this guy's his hair is really this odd color. And I'm just curious.
Well, Bill, actually, people have a right to achieve anything they want in life. And
no question
whether
about
whether it's wearing a pinstripe suit or whether it's wearing
Whatever
a
it
paisley
is.
tie, we each have
Whatever
our
it
own
is.
our own impression.
But is that part of your success aura, is my actual
No,
question.
I think a person has a right to be what he chooses to be.
Of course.
Whether he changed his name from Jack Rosenberg to Werner Erhard or to Bill Boggs, or whether he decides to wear a paisley suit, I think we all have our own objectives in life. It can be pretty much whatever you want. And if you limit your horizon and say, well, gee, you can't do that because you've got a program and a mechanism in your
I
head.
totally agree with
Yeah.
that. My motto is defy category. Don't
Okay.
let them put you in a category. But I'm just serious. I'm just curious as to whether or not it's part of, you think that it makes you more successful.
Well, it satisfies me.
Satisfying.
And that's really all that matters. And whether a person out in the audience is satisfied in driving a Cadillac or not, or whether a person is satisfied. Neil gets seasick in a yacht, it'd be foolish for him to have a yacht.
Correct.
But if he derives pleasure out of it, and if it doesn't hurt anybody, whether that's Zen or not, that's perfectly okay.
I agree completely. One last thing from How to Live Like a Millionaire, very quickly. You say how to make friends with 100 successful people.
Well, yeah,
The shoemaker across the street, again.
Right.
How does he do it?
well, the shoemaker, of course, you understand there's a book called Who's Who, and there are various books that list people.
Right.
In order to achieve success, Napoleon Hill says you want to associate with successful people, Bill. Now, whether it's the shoemaker or whether it's more likely a person who has a little different level of aspiration, you join a club, you join your church, you join your synagogue, and you seek out people who have common objectives to you. Now, you just can't go and social climb and hang in there if in fact you're an influence leader in this community, and you and I have some common areas of interest. Yeah. And I might choose to try and befriend you. If you choose to accept me, I'd approach you. I'd either write you, I'd call you on the phone, I'd invite you to a party, I'd join the club that you have, but I'd want to come into contact with successful people because there's a vibration that good people put out, and you want to be part of it.
I understand that, but cultivation is a very important word there.
Certainly.
Let's take a break. We'll come back with Jim.